Thanks very much, Di, and thank you very much to everyone for coming out on a Friday night. I know it's a bit hard sometimes to drag yourself out, particularly in the middle of winter. And I particularly, obviously, am grateful to Julietta and Kevin, and also Anne Harrington, who's here with Kevin, for coming all this way up to talk about Cliffy and to share their experiences, and also to talk about the other things that they've done, because I think both of them have had long careers and there are probably things that they can share with us that we don't know about, including me. I'd also like to thank Philip. We really appreciate it. I know that, you know, East Gippsland businesses are incredibly generous in supporting these sorts of things, and Carly McCaskill from East Gippsland Marketing has always done a great job too in helping to bring people to the area, and yeah, we do really appreciate that. Thanks very much, Philip. I'm sure you're all here as well because of Cliffy's story. I don't know nearly as much about it as these guys do, but as you probably know, Cliff Young's victory in the 83 Sydney to Melbourne Ultra Marathon was one of the biggest sports stories of the 80s. The 61-year-old potato farmer with his laconic country style and shuffling gait captured the hearts of the Australian public. It was an extraordinary effort, and he became quite the cult hero during that period of time. I think there were a few ups and downs in his story. It wasn't all up, and I'm sure that Julietta can share some of those things with us too. The inspirational story has obviously been told recently on ABC television in the telemovie Cliffy, starring Kevin, and in the companion biography, which was written and researched very thoroughly by Julietta. The story itself with Julietta came about because Julietta was asked by the publisher to write a biography about Cliff Young to coincide with the 30th anniversary of his win in that race. And Julietta is a long-time journalist, as she's been introduced. She's previously written books, I think 5 published books now. None of them had been biographies. She tends to focus on place. And in fact, at the time, Julietta had pitched to the publisher a story about the Hume Highway, which might be interesting to Julietta. I wasn't quite sure when she first told me, but I think she's done the most remarkable job of turning the Hume Highway into a key character in the story. I think we probably all like to hear how she managed to achieve that. I think Julietta's previous books had been mostly travel memoir, and she's very interested in place. I guess one of the things that I'm interested in knowing is, what do you look for when you're writing a story? How was it that Cliffy came about, if you're actually interested in place?
Well, because it came about because I was asked to do it, and like you, the publisher was not that interested in the Hume Highway. I said, a bit more information, please. No, she was intrigued. I grew up in Melbourne. I lived in Sydney for 17 years. Was being drawn back to Melbourne, number one by my football club, secondly by just family, and so I was spending a lot of time going up and down the highway, and I became intrigued by place. For me is about identity. It's about culture. It really is who we are. It's the background to who we are. You know, the previous book to this, I'd taken myself off to Italy and written memoir and done a lot of soul searching, and had discovered that when you remove your context, the things that you're used to, you can tell a whole other story. You can become more self-revealing, and it leaves a void where there's room for storytelling. But conversely to that, I think that, you know, place informs so much of who we are. So that's why I was really interested in the humour. It was up and down, up and down. You know, it's a tale of two cities sort of thing. So when the publisher said, well, look, the producers of the Cliffy movie have come to us. They're saying, is there a book in this? And they thought of me because I was interested in the humour, but also because I love stories of ordinary people doing the extraordinary. I think that we all tend to love those things. But I also love stories about people, place and time. And Cliffy, which sounds like the bleeding obvious really, because all stories are about that, but those are 3 elements that I do look for. And I think that place is almost, it's the thing that doesn't change. People change, time changes, but place remains. And so Cliffy running along the Hume, that's why that appealed to me. But so when I got into it, I just discovered that this was a really great, not just a story about an Australian, but it was a story about Australia. And you know, I write to make sense of the world that I live in, and so it really did offer me great insight into, you know, a very formative time certainly in my life, the early 80s.
Can you tell us any secrets from your life in the early 80s?
As I said earlier tonight, if you remember the 80s, you weren't there.
Obviously, Cliffy was an extraordinary man, an ordinary man who had an extraordinary achievement, particularly in his later years. He was also quite a character and became something of a national oddity as well as a hero. He was a vegetarian, a teetotaler, and a virgin who still lived on the farm with his mother at the age of 61. What did you know about Cliffy going into the project, and over the course of your research and writing the book, how did your perception and perspective change?
It changed dramatically, and I imagine it. I'm interested to hear what Kev has to say about the same thing, because I remembered the buffoon. I was in 1983. I was just finishing uni. You know, I was more interested in, you know, dancing at the jump club in Glenferrie than this. But I remember it very distinctly. It was a big moment in time. But I remembered how he became everywhere. He was everywhere. He was on everything. He was on Prisoner. He was on game shows, and he was in the paper the whole time. And my remembrance was more of the joke that he had become, which is, which was unfortunate. So when I got into it and remembered the amazing feat, what he did was an incredible thing, and it, you know, galvanised the nation. We're all excited about it. It came at the end of a pretty tumultuous political time. Hawke had just got into power that year. We had the Black Friday or the Ash Wednesday bushfires. There was big bushfires early on Ash Wednesday in that year, and the nation was grieving, and the nation needed something to get excited about. And I think that, you know, Joe Bielke picked. Politics were amazing at that moment. You know, Midnight Oil was singing Beds Are Burning. It was really sort of muscular, and then along came Cliffy. Not so muscular. So for me that was the most intriguing thing for me, was remembering what he did on the surface and then digging below and finding this extraordinary character that, you know, had a history and there's all sorts of things that no one had sort of pieced together about Cliffy. That he was actually a good runner. He he had a little dabble with kite surf, birdman, hang gliding. He was, as you say, he was a vegetarian. He was in charge of the veggie patch at home, and would seriously, which you see in the movie, move insects off the path of cows so they didn't get hurt. His brother Sid said he had a supernatural ability to spot wildlife, and he was an amazing adventurer, an amazing storyteller, and the best big brother, I think, that anybody ever had. So, you know, to find this very rounded character that I fell in love with was as a writer, was an incredible gift.
I guess, Kev, to your perception, was that similar going in, and did your perception change in all of the research that you did?
As soon as possible, an actor tries to love the character they're playing, to entirely see through their perspective. So I never saw it as a joke. A person will tell a joke because they need approval, or because they're embarrassed, or usually those two things. And I think that Cliffy's self-effacing humour came from that. So I never saw him as a joke. I saw his shuffle as a reason, as a logical, intelligent choice, if you're going to run a long way. And I saw him falling in love with a young woman because he fell in love with a younger woman, and I didn't judge it, you know. It was interesting, you had a problem with John Fane's attitude, because I wonder if he would have felt the same if Mary was a man.
I don't know what John Fane said, so I might just leave that one there. But I will read a passage from the book, which I thought that Julietta really summed up the running style very well. I'm sure everyone has seen the running style or has some recollection of the running style, and we'll speak to Kevin in a while about how he actually achieved that, because that was a lot of hard work to get there. The way Julietta has written it, it was a style dictated by legs customarily, it's also a red wine filled shod in heavy sloppy boots that didn't allow much flex at the ankle, that held the knees somewhat rigid, boots that might have flicked off inconveniently in a muddy paddock if the leg was kicked back too violently, boots that didn't encourage the foot to bend too much or offer them much support, flat-footed boots, gum boots. That's actually the way he ran. He ran because he was used to running around in paddocks in gum boots. He had to keep his gum boots on his feet, laden down with mud, and so he just ran that way. Yeah. Tell me a bit about how you actually achieved that, because that was quite an effort, I understand.
It wasn't natural for me. Get around at Yarraville. No, we've got a place up the country, and I did run around in gum boots, quite literally. But we, when the Cliffy project was announced, a man made himself known to us. His name was Martin Noonan, and he was one of the original two organisers of the race itself, and he's also a passionate runner, and he offered to help me to approximate the run, I suppose, and the running style. So he came with a video camera, and he'd send me off running, and he'd give me some instructions, and we started from the feet, and I was sliding as best I could, but I was hurting my feet because I was restraining my natural balance. But it all came together, over a period of time, over 3 sessions. And the last bit of the of the puzzle was that I saw some wild ABC footage of Cliffy running, and he was running over the Westgate Bridge, and they kept the cameras on him as he left. And I noticed how far out from his back his elbows were, which straightens you up, And so you can run much more flat-footed. No, it's on video. So you can run much more flat-footed if you keep your elbows out the back. Now, if you're trying to do that, your feet, start popping up in the air. So, it was all, and I saw a picture of him from a book about the 80s, about the great events of the 80s, and his posture is so beautiful. His spine is so straight. And that's because his elbows were at the back. And therefore, when he got tired and his arms fell, that was just gravity, So that, that business of the stages of tiredness that happened in the film, they were easily done, by just retaining the integrity of the posture and just sort of leaning forward with a bit of tiredness. Your hands did naturally what his did.
The injury is
the injury too.
He was also very injured, I think, after a fall.
He's very shy,
The other thing, I think, one of the things that you have talked about quite extensively in the regarding the preparation for the telly movie was the physical training.
Yeah.
Obviously, Cliffy ran 800 odd kilometres. That's probably not something that you had done previously or were physically prepared to do.
No.
How did you? and I'm guessing that you're probably not going to do it anytime soon, even though he's got quite a few years on you.
Yeah.
How did you actually prepare for that? What sort of physical training did you go through to get into that body shape and that mental state?
Yeah. Look, I had to exercise. I had to do the exercise I could to lose the weight, because it was just frankly preposterous to play Cliffy, as fat as I am now and fatter, preposterous. So I had to lose the weight. So I started just doing low impact stuff because I was so badly unfit. Now I knew that, because I know about filmmaking, I knew that in practical terms, the most I was ever going to have to run was probably a couple of 100 yards, because it would be a very boring scene if someone was talking while they ran 200 yards, because that's a long time, It's a long time on film. So I thought, okay, say I had to walk back and do that again 5 times, I'll get that fit. So I had to be able to look like I could run from Sydney to Melbourne, not actually run from Sydney to Melbourne. So the weight loss was the reason why I did all the exercise.
Kevin's being a little bit probably self-effacing there. He actually lost 18 kilos over a fairly grueling 3 months where he wasn't allowed to eat very much and he did have to exercise quite a lot. Yeah. And got grumpy, but I was a bit I guess the next question is, if our perception of Cliffy, in fact, was so warped, how did that happen? Is that a media thing? Is it a legend thing? Why is our perception of him so wrong?
That's a very big question. I think, well, first of all, when Cliffy became a celebrity as we know it didn't exist. He really was, it was almost a trailblazer in many ways. We didn't have that sort of guy that had become just famous because he was famous. I mean, Tony Rafferty was famous, but he was on the cereal packets and he had a sort of a sense of showmanship to him. Robert De Castella was famous, but Deeks then moved, Robert De Castella, who I'm sure you all know, won, he was a champion marathon runner, but he went on to become the head of the AIS, so you know, Deeks had legitimacy. Rafferty sort of faded into the sunset to some degree after this particular ultra because he was expected to win it and he didn't. So Cliffy was this whole new thing. He was 61 years old and he was from the country and we all loved him. He was our Cliffy, and then all of a sudden the tall poppy syndrome kicked in and he wasn't our Cliffy anymore. I think that, you know, that when I say the joke, that was the joke that I remembered, you know, and I was a kid then and sort of bought into that stuff. So, was it the media? Probably. The media loved him.
He never self-promoted. Those two other blokes self-promoted.
The other blokes self-promoted and Cliffy did not self-promote. That's true. And Cliffy, my understanding of Cliff was that Cliff just wanted to make people happy. He liked people to be happy. And so when they said, come on prisoner, he was like, oh, I'll go on prisoner. Sure, I'll make people happy. I'll go on prisoner. I'll do this, I'll do that, because it will make people happy. And then it turned. It's something. I don't think it's a particular. It is an Australian thing, but I think it's human nature generally that we do tend to, you know, eat people up and spit them out. And certainly, it, you know, was media driven as well. Neil Kearney, who's a very, very, you know, quite a famous sports reporter in this country and very accomplished, and he said that, you know, the media milked the Cliffy story until it became a joke, and then, you know, and basically he regretted that a lot. He regretted that a lot. Sorry.
Do you think it had something to do with him going?
Yeah, it did. I think that people turned. He married a woman who was, you know, considerably younger than him, and people were fascinated at first. Channel 10 had the exclusive on the wedding, which was Neil Kearney, and Eddie Maguire. Actually, one of his first gigs was guarding the marital door, so no one else could get the exclusive. Incredibly, and that was very new to Australia. So I think that put a sour taste in people's mouths. But you know what? They loved each other, Mary and Cliff. We'll talk about that later. Both Kevin and I talked to Mary, and you know, they loved that. It was a genuine thing. But I think you're right about that. I don't know. I think it's a mixture of all those things.
It was obviously a really different time, and it was, we've all sort of worked or covered celebrity in some capacity, and I certainly have, and you've lived it, and you've done it as well. But just to give you an example of this period, at that time, of course, there was no mobile phone technology. These guys were in caravans and without crew or with limited crew on the road. There's an explanation here that Julietta's written once again of what the race conditions were actually like. There were no escorts, no taped off lanes, no special treatment at all. This is running down the Hume Highway day and night, of course. on the Hume Highway, one of the most notorious stretches of road in Australia. In 1983, it was single carriageway pretty much its whole length, with plenty of blind spots and bends, sections with little if any shoulder, bridges that narrowed to one lane, and a stampede of semis roaring up and down it day and night. And here they were adding runners to the mix. Runners who very soon into their ordeal would be far less alert than any normal pedestrian. This is just not something that we would see these days, and it's another example of the way Julietta, of course, has managed to get the humour of the story. One of the things that you're obviously very interested in is time and capsules of time. How did you go about doing that? Is that something, did you do a lot of research? The book is really peppered. It feels like you're reading in that period. How did you get yourself into that?
Oh, well, it's the same. I mean, it's the same with the movie. I don't mean to speak on behalf of the movie, but Kevin can talk about how they went to great lengths to make it authentic, because people will sniff inauthenticity a mile away. But time is so important in this story. As you mentioned, it couldn't happen now, and it seems so extraordinary that they just started burling down the highway, and there was no insurance, and there was no the cops. They didn't even have permits. At the beginning, there's a story at the beginning of the race that Neville Rand was there, and one of the journalists turned to John Tolman, who was the other organiser, and said, "So John, just so you've got your permits?" And he's like, "What permits? I don't have permits." And he's like, "Neville Rand's over there. Go and have a quick chat to Nifty Nev." And they sort of cooked something up. And then the next time they got pulled over by the cops very, very soon into the race. The race almost didn't happen. And then John Tolman, who is one of those great garrulous men who was very big in South Melbourne Football Club, and he was the organiser of the Stall Gift, and just one of those he had a sports store in Heidelberg, and he's just one of those great, big, fantastic Australian characters who just talked bullshit to this box. Said, Neville Rand's got my permits back in the day. And away they went, So that just, as you say, it wouldn't happen now. And I think that I think it's important to capture time, particularly, not just for those of us who remember it, but Kevin was saying earlier today too how kids who didn't live it have been so excited about this story, because it's a story of it's a pure heroism in Australia. And I think that as a storyteller, to be able to enlighten people of that and lift their hearts and perhaps inspire them is an important thing. So I think that's why, but I didn't really answer the question. I did go, it just happened organically. I can't say that I set out to do it. To me, it was such an important part of the story that it was one of those things that just from the get-go needed to be a foundation of it.
I guess then going on to Kev with the same sort of question, obviously we've sort of talked about how you got into the physical character, your mental character. You're considerably younger, you've got a completely different life. He was 61, he was all of those other things. He was also in the early 80s. How do you get into that state to play that character?
Well, the era is easy because you have these professionals surrounding you to dress the set and create the era around you. So, that's just easy. Everything you can see, within reason, you've got a film crew there too, but everything you can see and touch at your access is from the era. So, you go there, you kind of, it serves you. It's sensory, right? In terms of how I got into his psychology, I just spent an awful lot of time running and walking, especially up the country, and in gumboots. And just the feeling of walking and running in the country just eases your head. You might be able to do this yourself, you probably do, The fact that you've got access, within minutes here of just the peacefulness of just being out in nature. And I was kind of toying, but not in a kind of front of brain sense, where I was just sort of put this question into the back of my brain, into my subconscious, why did Cliffy run, And I know in the movie it says to prove other people wrong and because he needed money, but just toying with it, you know, and I think the answer came to me through the sensory experience of just being out in this brilliant environment, you know. And look, it's just weird. It sounds like so hippie-ish, but that thing he had, you know, that thing he had of being able to have premonitions and being, I'm sure it was because he spent so much time communing with nature, and not in some bloody silly sense, you know, not in some stripping and dancing around the fire sense, but just opening your eyes and opening your ears, you know. And I'm sure that Cliffy came to me, fell on me because I got out of the way and made myself available to that experience, you know. There's a scene in the movie that's the most extraordinary movie scene I've ever done in my life. It's half cut, like they cut half it out. That doesn't matter. Me and Marty Sachs are on the veranda, you know. Yeah, who plays my brother. And he asked me, I'm feeling guilty about being away on promotional stuff because someone's asked me, not because I'm making any money out of it. And I'm feeling guilty about leaving my mum, right? So I just got, it was the last day, and I had this extraordinary combination of having been in that headspace, and also my mum's, you know, got Alzheimer's, and there was Joan, who'd had a very bad day a couple of days before, who I'd worked with, you know, when she was at her peak. We did an Alan Bennett monologue each, and so then, you know, and I was feeling for her and my mum, and Marty incredibly lost his brother in real life just before we shot, and so just like being there and looking at the sky and listening to my brother's voice, I just started to cry every single time, you know, 6-8 takes over 3 hours, and it wasn't my style of crying. I didn't cry like me. Different things happened to my mouth and my body, and I don't know. I just relate so personally to the story, but also to that thing he had, that premonition thing he had. It was you got it at your access, you know. It's you know, if you're religious, there's something about it.
Can I say something about
it?
Yeah. It's strange. It's the first time I've heard you tell the story about the veranda, but it's the first time I've heard you talk about it like that, and I felt the same about this story. You know, Kylie, you were just asking me how those things fell into place. This thing fell into place like nothing I've ever done before. Yeah, and I really had a sense of getting Cliffy's story right for Cliffy, and there were bizarre coincidences, strange coincidences, like Wally, who was Cliffy's trainer. I managed to speak to Wally extensively, but just before he died, like so soon before he died. It was just crazy, uncanny little coincidences just happened all the way. That even though, of course, yes, it was, you know, hard work. Writing a book is work. The path was smoothed in very, very, very uncanny ways. And it was, I got out of the way and let Cliffy tell the story. That's exactly what I did.
Has that ever happened to either of you before or since? No?
Not in somebody else's story. I always feel the key to writing, and maybe it isn't that, I don't know, it probably isn't that deep, that you need to get out of the way and let it happen. Just let it happen. Let it, you know, people say how, you know, sometimes I sit there, the best writing happens when you don't know how it happened, when you come up the end of a 3-hour session and there it is, and it's, wow, okay, that's great. It's when you get out of the way. So it does happen, but this was another thing again.
Sorry, this is a great concept. We're running with this. You've got to do the prep first. You know, it's not like The Secret. You can't sit on your ass and it happens. Yeah. No, you've got to do the prep. You do the prep and then you get out of the way, and it's amazing the magic that happens. Amazing. And you, look, I reckon you can train yourself to do it a bit, you know, in terms of the coaching I do for actors. You know, you get them to do the prep, the research, all the stuff, and then you tell them, all right, go on a walk. You know, go on a walk, and the magic thing will happen. But, you know, you've got to make that decision to take that walk and be available to it.
Yeah.
You know, you can train yourself for it, I reckon.
Sorry, Carly. That's when people ask me, oh, what do you do about writer's block? I just always say this, no, I don't believe there's such a thing as writer's block. Because it is a process, and maybe I have trained myself to do it. And maybe it's newspaper training, because I tell you, at 6 p.m. when your editor comes and says, write another 2,000 words on something entirely different, and the deadline is at 8 p.m, there is no such thing as writer's block. But you know, if I'm stuck, I'll do that. Like, I'll go and walk. But I know that the work is done. Normally, the work is done, and I always say it's written in my head. So you just walk away and let it, you know, let it come in 2 hours.
I do like that. Sometimes it's not quite that easy, but it does happen, yeah. Just going back to Wally, one of the things that Julietta just talked about was the fact that she did meet Wally before he died. Wally was Cliffy's coach and rubber downer, really, I guess. He did all the massages. He was associated with the local footy club. There's a beautiful description of him in here, which I wanted to read out to you. And it really also talks about Cliff's crew, which once again takes you back to what kind of period we're talking about. And if you imagine now any of the professional runners, or indeed any of the professional athletes, and I'm probably talking men or women these days, when you read this, just have imagine back to what it was like. Cliff showed up with his crew consisting of a young girl, a large country woman, her husband, a real country-looking fellow, and an old man called Wally. Wally was apparently the Colac Football Club massage man, and he looked like and smelled like an old dirty liniment bottle. He spoke like one too. All these in a rusty panel van. The other runners had mobile homes, hot showers, sponsored clothing, multiple shoes and assistants. Cliffy had one pair of shoes and the t-shirt I gave him.
That was from Martin.
That quote was from Martin Noonan, who was with Westfield at the time. So that just gives you an indication of what they were doing in those circumstances. And it wasn't just running that distance, it was just the most extraordinarily difficult conditions too, because there were rainstorms and all sorts of things. I think there are quite a few funny anecdotes in the book, and some of them I didn't know about, and you might remember them, and maybe they were widely reported at the time, but I did want to ask Julietta and also Kev about them because I thought that they were really funny. One of the things that really came up for me was actually the way Cliff won, and indeed the way he won was by taking the lead really early on, and it's a pretty funny story as to how that happened. Can you please tell us that one?
Sure. Now, I want to be clear about this, that Cliff won because Cliff was better than anyone else. Cliff could run longer, on less sleep, and just, you know, keep going. And he had the heart to do it. But how he discovered that he had the heart to do it was the first night. I'm going to say, first night.
It was the second night of the movie. It was in reality.
It was the first night.
Yeah.
So Wally and Cliff were out. You know, Cliff wouldn't go to bed, and Wally was keen for Cliff to get outside of the first town, because Wally's belief was you get outside of town. You know, it's that hurdle is over. Basically, everybody normally, all the runners were stopped in town, and some of them were sitting down to counter meals with beers and going to the Chinese restaurant and drinking a bottle of wine on the first night of running, like however long they ran the first night. Cliff kept, I think it was Mittagong, now I think about it, kept going. Wally pushed him out of town. Cliff wanted to keep going. Wally said, come on, mate, you know, finally got him to pull up and got him inside. Everybody in the crew was asleep. There was no food out for Cliff. You know, the girls, which was Cliff's sister Eunice, and Mike Tonkin, who was Cliff's manager, Shelley, everyone had gone to sleep. They were like, oh, bugger this, you know, he's going to keep going, so they'd gone to sleep. If there was food out, they couldn't see it because they kept it very dark. So Wally rummaged around and found a tin of cold tomato soup and a tin of cold spaghetti, and they held him up and said, which one do you want, Cliff? And Cliff was like, oh, I have the spaghetti. And so Wally had down the soup. They went to bed. Wally set the alarm. Cliff went to sleep in the van. Wally went to sleep in the front. Everyone passed out. At some point, the alarm went off, and Wally was, groggy, and just all of a sudden, shit, I've slept in, because he went back to sleep. Raced into Cliff, said, Cliffy, we've slept in. Cliff put on his shoes, didn't tie up his shoelaces, and took off into the night. Wally followed him. So it's pitch dark. Now, there's a couple of hours later, it's still pitch dark, and they're still running, and it dawns on Wally that something's wrong. He looks at his watch, and instead of getting up at 6 a.m, they've got up at something like 2 a.m. The story changes somewhat, like depending on who you talk to, as to exactly what the time was. But then, so Cliffy goes, after a while, goes, oh, mind a bowl of soup or something. Wally's, oh, where am I going to get a bloody bowl of soup from? Just keep going. So they just kept going, kept running. But what it showed Cliff was that he didn't need much sleep. So there'd been this gentleman's agreement that they were all going to get a certain amount of sleep every night. Don't go to bed at 10, get up at 6. Cliffy broke that rule and continued to break the rule. George Purdon, who was one of the contenders, had this sleep banking process that he was going to go through, and Purdon stuck with it, but Cliff just burned them off.
There's another lovely description in here about Wally's attitude towards Cliff, and it was effectively one of tough love, which I thought was really nicely written by Julietta in that description of how Cliffy had asked for a bowl of soup at 4 o'clock in the morning after 3 hours sleep and no food the day before. And Wally had basically said, where am I going to get you a bowl of soup? Just keep running, silly old bugger. But anyway, they basically said, Cliff actually had a head that was really easy to get into. And this is once again Mike Tonkin, his manager, speaking. He said, one thing I learned from footy, they used to say that love and greed and hate are the 3 biggest motivators. I would say to Cliff, has that road got you beat, Cliff? He'd go, what? And then just get going. He was like that. He'd get into his head nice and easy, and Wally was good at that too. Wally would be rubbing his legs and he'd say, oh, I'm stuffed. And Wally would say, you got no blood in them eyeballs, you'll be right. It's just what Cliff needed, and he'd just get out there and run again. And so it's pretty much based on the book. Cliff didn't eat that much, didn't drink that much, and just kept running. He didn't have much sleep. You've also talked, Kev, about your preparation for the role. You've also spoken a couple of times about how you weren't actually the one on the film doing it the hardest.
No, that's right. I mean, filmmaking is illusion, so a lot of the time, if I was running in front of a moving camera, I could literally be running this quickly, seriously, this quickly, yeah? Because a camera moving makes me appear to be running much faster than that, right? So, for all the time that I was running at that pace, there was a cart with a cameraman and a camera on it, which is very heavy, and a bloke, some poor bloke, dragging it backwards. So when I'm struggling running downhill, he's carting all that uphill backwards.
And I did think that was important to throw in because, we're all feeling sorry for Kev losing his 18 kilos, but in fact, and of course that was happening in rain as well some of the time. I guess the next thing that I did want to ask about, you've both obviously been writing and creating a real person. Not just a real person that we remember, but a real person who was very much loved by the people that knew him personally. How do you go about doing that? Doing the person justice, not upsetting anyone, not creating a caricature? That must be an awful lot of pressure, and how do you do it?
Well, bloody YouTube has a lot to answer for, Because as soon as a kid sees you playing someone from real life, they go, right, and just check it up against the person from real life, So, there is pressure on to be accurate, So I had the bloke train me, Marty train me with the running. I also had a lady called Anna McCrossan Owen, who's went to the VCA with me and who's specialised in voice accent training. So we spent a lot of time listening to Cliffy. I had 3 sessions with her too, to try and, approximate his voice. I could have got a little bit more accurate, but we kind of settled on a hybrid. I can't remember why, but the producers and the director liked it a bit better. Maybe more of me came out, more of that sense of humour and, that piss-takey thing. I don't know, I appear to have that. But so there was, it was just hard work. I think that was the question, wasn't it? How do you go about it? You just do the vocal exercises, you just do the physical exercises.
How was the response?
Oh, the response, yeah, well, we had a showing in Colac because Julietta was there. You tell everyone about it.
I'm actually going to tell you about it because he didn't stay. So he didn't stay, and I wish you had, because I sat in front of Cliff's family, Sid and his wife Molly, and all the kids and the whole family, and they were just exclaiming in delight all the way through. It was amazing, and the whole audience was, you know, people who knew him. It was overwhelmingly good, and there was a bloke sitting next to me who was punching my arm every two. Like, he didn't realise when he got to that's Cliff. Oh, that's Cliff. Oh yeah, oh, that's Cliff. He was like, oh, so what do you do, love? I was like, all right. Oh, it was. But the thing for me, I mean, having submerged myself in Cliffy world was why I felt that, you know, you settled on the hybrid, etc. But that the spirit of Cliff was the thing that was captured so beautifully, and that's why they were able to be, even though they all knew him, and you know, as Nigel O'Dell was very keen to point out at the beginning of that screening, the movie was a drama. It's not a documentary. You know, I wrote essentially the documentary. They were able to go on the journey because the spirit of Cliff was captured, and that was it's a very beautiful thing.
And that's that stuff. That's that stuff I was talking about, that magic thing.
I guess most probably knows this, but when did Cliff Young die?
10 years ago.
So
he died 10 years ago.
People actually know him as a living person, yeah, but only 10 years ago.
Yeah. But I mean, there was a lot of people, everyone in Colac claims that they...
Even though it seems like in the book, not everyone was particularly his friend or his man until that happened.
Yeah, they were very used to seeing him shuffle down the road. He was a figure that everybody. I mean, if you had a guy around here running around the street, he'd run. He lived 30k out of town, but he'd run into town for a haircut and run back up the hill, and they all used to see him.
I guess that also, that once again, you've written a biography. It was obviously, you know, based on fact. What are your sources when the main character is gone?
Newspapers. There were incredible wealth of material about Cliff at the time, and I was very, very fortunate to sort of chance upon a motherload of clippings from somebody. But you know, the State Library, the Film and Television Archive, and then interviewing as many people as you can. You know, you get one lead, and then somebody says, "Oh, you should talk to so and so. Oh, you should talk to so and so." And I put bless local papers, because I put a piece in. I actually just wrote a letter to the Colac Herald saying, "Can you put something in the letters? I'm seeking people who knew Cliff," and so they ended up doing a story, and then from that I got heaps and heaps of people coming forward, and you know, it's you've got to be systematic about it. So the state and libraries. How much food I bought?
Can you actually tell us about the process? Because obviously not everyone here's written a book or a biography. You went down there and you were based down there for a while. What period of time does it take to research, write, where to go, the whole thing?
Look, if I'd had 5 years, I would have done 5 years, but I had about 3 months, so you know, I had to do it very quickly. So my days, and I also still I write, you know, for a living, and books don't pay very much. So, what were my days like? Well, it really is. Again, it's just you treat it like a job. You get up and you've got to get the structure there first. You've got to find out what the story is and work out, you know, where it's going to start, where it's going to finish, and what's going to be the arc. You know, what's going to be the moment where that's the great pinnacle, the dramatic pinnacle. It should have been. You know, the finish is obviously a big thing, but that. There are some amazing moments in this story. It does, as you mentioned, it goes up and down. So getting the research into place, the initial research, then getting the structure right, And you know, it changes and morphs. It's always a very fluid thing for me. The more you talk to somebody, you know, you speak to somebody and discover something else that's going to be the big moment. So it's quite an organic process for me.
I think, Kev, I didn't really introduce you the way I was going to because I did things a bit out of order, but everyone knows Kevin, and everyone knows that Kevin's been in things like Sea Change and Underbelly, probably Neighbours, lots of other guest roles over the years, films including The Dish, Australian Rules, Guru Wayne and Red Hill, which was filmed in Omeo. He was also nominated for an AFI award for his leading role in The Honourable Wally Norman.
I'm glad you didn't say AFL.
AFL, well no, they're also not called AFI awards anymore, they're actor awards, I think. Yeah. What you might not know is that Kevin is also an accomplished writer and has had several works produced for theatres. He also wrote on a TV series for another Australian actor called Eric Banner, and I'm not sure what happened to him. How did you actually get into acting in the first place, and is there much correlation with writing, do you think, having done both?
Oh yeah, look, I got into acting through just clowning around in front of the class, you know. No, we never had drama as such, so it was just a matter of being a comedian. And as a comedian, you have to write your own stuff. We don't have any comedians here who get writers submitting them stuff. A comedian is a writer-performer. So, having done that, the pathway into writing was, well, I was already doing writing, you know, so that's how I got known by the guys who were writing for Tonight Live and Eric Banner and so on. And in terms of writing the little plays I wrote, I guess I just, they were just this act of love, you know, just something I felt, they've all been, you know, personal things. I wrote about my being a dad bringing up a daughter, and that was one was called Guess Whose Mum's Got a Willy. Because, you know, our roles were reversed when our kids were little. Anne was doing the breadwinning and I was being the mum. And then I wrote one called 17 Now about my daughter and her friends, because unlike me, who never had any friends from the next suburb, you know, we're all very tribal. You know, because of the internet and because she went to a private school across town, she had friends, you know, from all different gangs, you know, and it was, so I wrote about that too. So I guess those projects are just literally artistic expressions, but the other stuff's come out through, I guess, contacts and being a comedian. But I tell you, you know, acting informs writing writing informs acting so much, because a good definition of acting, a useful one, is to serve the intentions of the author. Now, if you can put the author's hat on, you can do that much more effectively.
One of the things that you told me about when you were first approached to play Cliffy was that you were very interested in it because of the story. Can you tell us about how that actually came about, playing Cliffy? Yeah, everything, the whole process.
Oh, look, I auditioned twice. You know what happened? I auditioned, I got this, I was going to be in a musical, right? Now, I could barely sing, but I was pretty pleased by this. And the musical was going to be, it was Dean's other film about Paul Hogan and, you know, they're gay. They pretend to be gay. Strange Bedfellows. They were going to make a musical out of Strange Bedfellows. And I got in it. I successfully auditioned. I sang an original stand-up comedy song called Let's All Get As Pissed As a Fart. That was my song. I don't think anyone's ever got into a musical singing such a song. And I was wrapped, you know, then the musical fell over, so I was really cheesed off. And this bloke rings me up and says, "Oh, g'day, it's Dean, I'm from Strange Bedfellows, you know, maybe you got auditioned for the musical." I go, "Yeah, what do you want?" You know, because it was, you know, I was really disappointed that I hadn't got in it. But he said, "You know, we've put you up for Cliffy to play Cliffy Young, do you remember him?" And I'm going, "Oh, yeah, but I'm fat." You know, so all I did was put, you know, hurdles in the way and suggest other people. But he's apparently, Dean and Nigel, you know, quite like my work. So they were pushing the ABC and at the same time seeing other people. And I'm very open to other people, you know, if they did a better audition. But they continued to like me, but we're getting some resistance from the ABC. So I had to audition 2 weeks later, and that's where that hybrid thing came up. You know, that's where I perhaps washed myself out a bit to try and impersonate Cliffy, as opposed to keeping a little bit of that spark that he had anyway. Maybe I was being too reverent or something. Anyway, you know, a few weeks later than that, I I ended up getting a gig. I remember I sent an email for them to pass on to the ABC people saying, you know, I will commit to this. I'll never fail because I haven't tried hard enough or cared hard enough, and I will lose 10 kilos. I promised like a contract, you know, and ended up being 18. But yeah, that was the process. A process of, I suppose, you know, initial audition, being, you know, liked by the director and the producer, and then I guess being tested.
There was one other thing that's just following on from what you said before. You said that when you prepare to play a character, you actually really become that character. That's quite interesting, I guess, to me, given that you've also got a history of playing Lewis Moran in Underbelly. Can you tell us about that character?
Yeah, well, I can deal drugs, anyone who wants them. It's like a skill I acquired. No, honestly, Cliffy was the most... look, every project dictates its own process, yeah? You would have found this as a writer. You don't go, I will write all my books like this, you know? The subject matter dictates how you do it, and Cliffy required that, whereas Lewis was very well written and kind of all there on the page. I spoke to a few people about him. I heard a bit of footage of his voice. It was police surveillance. because he's not on, he didn't get interviewed. He was a great gangster. Carl Williams was a shithouse gangster because he was out there trying to be famous, you know? Lewis was old school, don't, you know, keep a low profile. So there was no footage of him except, you know, walking outside the court. You know, there's none of him, you know, going, oh, you know, here I am. So yeah, the process was a much simpler one because there's not the YouTube reference point straight away, and because I kind of had his body shape and his voice pretty quickly.
I guess the next thing is I've asked you about whether you were concerned about Cliffy's loved ones actually not liking performance. How did you feel about Lewis Moran's loved ones not liking performance?
Look, I mean, it's a serious issue. I mean, one day his grandchildren will come to me and say you misrepresented my grandfather, and I will owe them a conversation. I'll first say I didn't write it, and I didn't cast me, but you know, when we're dealing with real people, we owe them, you know, and Mary, this is a factor for Mary, you know, I don't want to get into Mary, but this was a factor, you know. I'm a real person, I've lived my life, and you're an actor, you know, turning up and you want shit from me, you know, and what do I get in return? I get exposed, your version of me, and I've got no control over it. So we owe them a conversation. Ultimately, art, I reckon, you know, I've got this thing about you know, you can't censor anything. If somebody wants to say something that's entirely offensive to all of us, they've absolutely got the right, you know. But we do owe a conversation when we call our character that person's name.
Okay, I think that really leads us into Mary. Obviously, Cliff's wife, Mary, married Cliff. She was 23, he was 62, I believe. That was a tricky one, and it was turned into very much a caricature in the media and possibly led to the way people perceived him. What was Mary like? What was that relationship like? And how did you feel skirting that in the book? Or in fact, not skirting it, going right there?
No, I you know, met Mary and had long conversations with her, and my take on, well, first of all, Wally was but actually, and also Cliff's immediate family liked Mary, genuinely liked Mary. Wally thought she was a ripper. And I think that they were genuinely in love. They were both very unusual characters. They were both very innocent in the ways of the world. The way they came together, you know, obviously Cliff was already famous when they met, but for me it was a genuine story of two misfits coming together. They remained friends after they divorced, and that was inevitable. I mean, the age difference was crazy, and but not to them at the time. But you know, people grow and change, and maybe they, you know, maybe it wasn't inevitable. I don't know, but they did break up. I was very, very, very keen to just state the facts of it as I saw it, and to tell the story with love in my heart. I was not there to judge Cliff or to judge Mary, just to tell their story. And my big motivation overall with this story was to celebrate Cliff's memory. It wasn't to muckrake or to, you know, get into any things that certain people might have wanted it to get into, and so that's how I approached it. And I really like Mary. I think that she's very, as I said, very, very unusual woman, and I think that Cliff was a very unusual man.
What do you hope people take away from reading the book and from knowing the story, from the perception that you have now portrayed?
I love stories that show us all that anything is possible, that we can do anything we set our minds to, and that the human spirit is marvelous and miraculous, and you know, we have a very limited time on this planet, and stories that show people making the most of that and taking their opportunities and living their life to the fullest are the best stories, if you ask me. And so that's what I hope that people get from it.
Did it satisfy your desire to write about the Hume?
No, that's still on the back.
What's next for you? What are you working on now? And I just to explain to those that wouldn't know, Julietta has just actually returned from Canada and Alaska. She's a travel writer for Fairfax and for various other publications, so she spends most of her time jetting around the world and the country, and we're very lucky to have her here just briefly because she's about to get off again.
Look, I've got a couple of ideas. This one, you know, you need to let it, you know, sit for a while. I have got a couple of ideas, but nothing that I really want to talk about. I mean, the book before this was very different. It was called Me, Myself and Lord Byron, and it was memoir, and it was about my family and about certain struggles that I've had in my life and overcoming those. And I followed the travels of the poet Lord Byron around Italy and had a marvellous time. So I'd really ideally like to get an idea like that again.
There's an acting school with Shane O'Connor, who's another Melbourne-based actor. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, look, we teach, look, it's a little, it's to save us having to be waiters, you know, and I mean no disrespect to the waiters, but we're getting on and grumpy, so it's best we don't do that. No, we look, when I was, most actor training is theatre-based. You'll do 3 years of theatre training, and then you'll get on a set and you won't have any idea, and I got a few little tips from older actors when I was, you know, starting to get those gigs, but basically I buggered them up, and it was because I had no idea of how to apply all the stuff that I knew to that very specific skill, and so that's what Shane and I do, with trying to save some young people a few years of, you know, failing because they don't know the rules, you know. And I think I'm going to I'll work backwards. We'll have a holiday in New York and we'll work on a project backwards from that, because that's what you did.
One of the things I should just add...
I want to know how many federal politicians he's taught.
Have you been teaching any federal politicians how to perform with the camera?
If I did, I'd be a disgrace.
One of the things that we were just talking about at Tara House over a glass of wine earlier was how we could, perhaps Kevin and Julietta could work together to come up with another biographical project. I think we didn't actually come up with New York or Italy, but perhaps you could work a bit further on that. I think I've probably covered all of the things that I wanted to ask, but I'm sure that there are people that would like to ask something. So, would anyone like to ask Julietta or Kevin questions? No?
Julietta? Yes. What is your fascination with the Hume Highway?
Oh, well, it's just, I've spent a lot of time on it. For me, it really does define a lot about the East, it defines a lot about Australia, about the East Coast and about the way we live. It's this link between city and country, and I love pulling into little towns, you know, for the vanilla slice and for the, you know, the pie shops and all the food. But people whiz along it. It's something to be conquered normally for people. But I found the little stories in the towns intriguing. You know, I think that's part of the travel writer thing. I love the way if you take something, if you take the slow road, what it reveals about things. And for me, it does define us. It's so important, you know. It's a main trucking route. It's a route between two cities, but it's also, you know, there are big koala colonies along there, and there are communities that people don't even think about when they drive along it. And there are, you know, there are the guys who drive the ambulances, and there are the guys who drive the tow trucks, and so the life, it's this really sort of living thing, like the Amazon almost, you know, and that to me is fascinating. I wanted to unfurl the layers. Early in, it was about 2000, I went and lived in a town called Tibooburra in remote New South Wales, and wrote about living in the outback, just because I'd gone there and was fascinated with it and wanted to find out more. And for me, you know, I think the outback defines who we are as Australians, even if we've never stepped foot in it. It's this big forbidding thing that's sort of at our backs, and so I am a student of the human condition, and I'm an Australian, and I'm just curious, and fantastically people pay me to indulge my curiosities. You know, I went to Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean after the Tampa to do the same thing, to sit with the refugees for 3 months. We're in that community where the Navy was coming and going, and so, you know, I like place. I like place and time, and events fascinate me.
What's going to happen to the story of Cliffy now that there's the book and the ABC have shown the telly movie? Is that it?
It was the 30th anniversary, so I think that was the moment. But I don't know. I think that I reckon it could be done again. I don't know.
There was another movie script being hopped around at the same time, ridiculously, 30 years later. And fortunately, the ABC chose the one that I got in. But Channel 7, I think, were interested in another one. So they could do that, you know. I mean, how many times has Elegant Nest been done, or whatever, you know?
There is. I've been contacted about another one by a Hollywood producer, actually. He said, you know, can I have a chat? I was like, I don't know if you actually realise that my book is kind of attached to the movie.
You buy the rights to the movie based on the movie. The book based on another movie.
Taking the slow road, it's the coast road. Why don't you look at the coast road rather than the freeway to hell?
Because for that very reason, because you think it's the freeway to hell, but it's actually not. Like, people live along that thing, and you know, you see beautiful there are houses and windmills and churches and schools and little hamlets that go off it. That's what I find fascinating, and especially now that it's become this big super thing. But there are still, you know, I find it incredibly fascinating.
Do you think perhaps there's a story to be told from the media point of view of Cliffy? Yeah.
Maybe, but I just think the media's fascination with itself is preposterous. It's just, you know, just to pot-will-eat itself. We are living that, you know.
Yeah, we are. Did you see the ABC one after Cliffy? The magazine? Yeah. Was the media feeding itself?
Like that?
Yes.
Yes. My mind boggles, because did they really behave so?
Paper Giants, yes.
Yeah.
I know both those.
Magazine journalist.
Know both those women. Yes.
Well, that's what I really think. You know, that kind of, I suppose it's big now, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Did you ever consider the run that Cliffy did against the Greek, whose name eludes me.
Janus Kouros.
Janus Kouros. Yeah, well, he won the subsequent ones.
Yeah.
You know, he blew Cliffy's records out of the water.
Because we all watched him come down.
Because they did one around the coast, that coast road.
He did, yes. We watched him out of Cabbage Tree.
Wolf ran with Cliffy. Where's Wolf? He ran with Cliffy for a couple of Ks.
He's still running.
Yeah. How did you go the very first time? It was different with a fair income bag of spuds.
Well, of course it was the feeding of bag of spuds. I mean, you see the gradient. The gradient of that hill was real, and you know how much a bag of spuds weighs. Oh, give me a break.
As he says, it's all an illusion.
That's what I think.
Die.
Kevin, you mentioned that when you are playing a character, you get totally absorbed in that character in order to portray them as they're meant to be. And again, I'm going to ask about Sea Change, because Sea Change went for a long, long time. And, you know, most of us would probably think of you as Kev on Sea Change. How much was he your creation, and how much was it the script that you had?
It's all the script, but I mean, the key to Kevin was his smile. You know, I mean, if you look at actors on telly, especially American shows, they hardly smile. Their faces are pretty dead, you know? Well, it's all Botox, but it's become like acting's nothing more or less than a convention, and the convention is becoming that the actors' faces will get stiller and stiller, yeah? Go, have a look. You know, take the serious. You know, people think actors express themselves through their faces a lot. No, we don't. We express ourselves less than life, right? Oh, you watch this footage back, I'll be as animated as buggery. If it was a film, I'd be like this, right? And you'd look at my eyes and I would draw you in, right? But Kevin smiled. That's what he did, he smiled inappropriately all the time. Unless everyone was smiling, and then he'd go... So that was that one.
I have a question that I've asked numerous times before of numerous actors. Why didn't Sea Change come back again?
It's one of those great ones where they left the audience wanting more. I think it's to be applauded, you know.
I think... Oh,
Yes, I'm back. Thanks. Look, on behalf of everyone here who I've just been watching them, they've all been totally intrigued by all three of you. I'd just like to thank you very, very much once again for coming all the way to Bairnsdale, and we hope that you'll come back so we can share some fine food and wine and show you around. Julietta was saying she's not even been to Lakes Entrance or Meetung or Painesville.
And she's a food and travel writer.
So you've been to Omeo, and so you've seen a lot.
Some of these other art centres around this area.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope you'll come back again. And this is just a little token of our appreciation.
Oh,
thank you very
so
much.
Thank you.
And just a show of appreciation too to Philip. Very many thanks.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll get that next time. Now we're going to put our guests over into the bookshop and give them a glass of wine, and hopefully you can purchase a book, or we have DVDs as well. And but anyway, go and have a chat to them. I'm sure that they'll be only too happy to talk to you. Many thanks again for coming in. Thanks again.